Today, we're going to talk a little bit about secure DevOps, putting the sec in DevOps and why it is important, especially as we see things happening in the world out there and more attacks now take place outside the operating system, outside the zero-day hacks, and they're trying to infiltrate using supply chain, including software. I don't know if you're particularly tuned with everything, but maybe you heard that maybe a week ago, maybe 10 days ago, somebody that is very prominent in the Node community, out of spite, just to show that open source should be consumed in a different way, decided to update all his NPM packages and published empty code. So there was no code in his packages. The problem with that was that a lot of software out there was dependent on those external packages to work. And with that action, he took down everything. So there was a whole debate about how we consume software, how we deploy software, and how we run software. In my capacity, I try to educate developers on how to build better software and more secure software. But security comes in a lot of layers and a lot of components. So one layer could be how you write your code and how defensive your code is against attacks. But then again, there's another layer on how you deploy and run your code in production and what can you do to secure against it. And then there's all these other layers on everything else. And even in secure DevOps, there are different components. So we'll only be looking at certain things. I think someone has a question. If you do have a question, feel free to put in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat. Feel free to interrupt if you want. Feel free to come and mute. I don't mind being interrupted, but the whole point is, as you walk out from this session today, you'll have an idea on how Microsoft Identity and our platform can secure things when running on Azure. Sometimes not even running on Azure, because with federated identity and stuff like that, we added new capabilities to your infrastructure. But before I get started, I want to also highlight to everyone that we do have 45.show /DID/ or has hackathon. We do have a hackathon next week that talks about decentralized identity. If you haven't worked with decentralized identity or you don't know what it is, we've already put some videos out there on YouTube, and we did a couple of streams on the 45 show that introduce people to decentralized identity. This is a way that we're trying to transform how users issue and verify credentials that they can use in the world out there. And especially with Web3 and the decentralization of everything, identity is a major component of that. If you want to learn how to build things, or if you want to see how the APIs work, make sure to join our hackathon. We have some pretty awesome swag out there. We'll be adding more, and they have samples, so everything should be easy for you. Now, if you want to learn more about identity and security, we also do a bi-weekly show on the 45 show. We do have a stream. All the content also is available for you on YouTube. So if you search on YouTube for 45 show, you'll find all our content. Again, we try to provide end-to-end scenarios on how you build with security. And even though we are on identity and focused on Microsoft Identity, we also show you how to build with any platform and any language. So the idea there is that we expect you, or we want you to come as you are, right? So whether you're building for Azure or on Azure, or whether you're building on other infrastructure or multi-cloud, the challenges are consistent. So, I might be talking about Key Vault today and service principles, but these ideas and these principles do apply to other things. So if you don't use Key Vault, then you should be using something like HashiCorp Key Vault or other tools that allow you to store things securely. And since the challenges are the same, and since we want to support everyone out there, this slide, sometimes it's fairly controversial considering that the only Microsoft thing that you see here is identity. But we want to make sure that developers are successful and enterprises are successful no matter where they run. So whether you use Bitbucket or whether you use GitLabs, whether you use IntelliJ and PyCharm to develop your code, and if you're running on AWS or Google Cloud or DigitalOcean, it doesn't really matter, or on-prem. And for languages, you know that Microsoft is an avid advocate of a lot of different languages outside the .NET ecosystem. So we have an open JDK that we develop these days for Java developers, and we contribute to Python and JavaScript. TypeScript is our extension on top of JavaScript. So it just goes to show that even though we do have first-party tools, we also want people to be successful when they use other platforms. And the hope is that we help you write better, more secure software. And finally, it doesn't really matter whether you're running serverless, Kubernetes, or bare metal, the security principles should be the same. However, and this is a big however, if you are running on the Microsoft platform, if you are running on the Microsoft ecosystem, there are some beneficial added benefits on top of beneficial added benefits. It makes no sense. There are some added benefits when you work with our tooling because everything is integrated. As I will show in a little bit, you can write code that runs in Visual Studio Code and uses Visual Studio Code credentials to authenticate against the Microsoft 365 platform or Azure services without you having to pass any credentials. And we also have a bolt-on access from the Power Platform. Therefore, everything works in the same way. The authentication works across the board, and it's a lot easier to work with our platform. But you could be using Visual Studio Code to create solutions around anywhere. So it doesn't really make any difference. But if you are running our code on our platform, on our tools, then we make your life a lot easier, whether you're a developer or an IT pro. And this is all I had to show you in terms of slides. I have no more slides. So let's jump straight into some code. So the first thing I wanted to show you is it's an ASP.NET solution running with .NET 6. And the funky thing about this solution is that it actually uses a couple of things to pull secrets. Now, I've worked with a lot of customers out there, and a very common thing that I find is that they struggle to manage secrets in their code. Some of them will be environmental variables, which is a big no-no. Some of them will be added directly into config files. So I'm pretty sure if I were to ask, how many of you have ever put a secret in a web config file or any other config file? Pretty much most of you will have done it at some point in their lifetime. So there's a consistent challenge on how do we secure secrets outside of our code while also making it easy to run on any environment. And we solve this problem using the Azure Identity library in collaboration with the Key Vault. So Azure Key Vault can be used to store secrets securely and access secrets securely, which is a great solution. But there was always this kind of a catch-22 or like a chicken and egg problem where you put your secret somewhere, but now you have to access that service. So to take it one step further, we came up with the notion of managed identities and service principles. And the Azure Identity Library has been designed at its core to actually do all that for you. So it uses an account that we will find somewhere to go and get an access token to access your services. And most of the services on Azure these days will support managed identity out of the box. If there are a few, then rest assured that we are working on making it available across the board. And the idea there is that you as a developer never ever have to think about how am I going to access an Azure service if I don't have a secret. In fact, you should know no secrets because it puts an onus on the developer to actually store and manage those secrets securely, but it also creates a great risk to companies because they need to know who knows these secrets. And I'm not lying when I say that I've been in companies where people have left and they haven't been an employee for 2 years and they still had access to production systems because nobody was rolling the secrets, nobody was managing the secrets, and they had no idea who knew what. People have then used that information to either maliciously damage enterprises or accidentally delete resources because they had too many permissions. How do you solve the challenge when the code runs outside of Azure? You're absolutely right. This is a great question. Now, we can't solve all the this is a great challenge, but let's assume that you have some data storage that is sitting on Azure and your code is running on-prem or it's running on AWS. You can now use something like a service principal, or you can use a certificate to authenticate against Azure Key Vault and still pull that information across. So there are ways to do that. We also came up with the notion of Azure Arc. So if I wanted to, I could actually Azure Arc onboard my devices. Let's say I have a data center that is, let's call it customer Rackspace. So I'm running my infrastructure on Rackspace, and I want to be able to access resources on Azure. I could Azure Arc, in effect, onboard those devices onto Azure. And even though they're not physically reside in our data center, they look and feel like Azure VMs. And therefore, Azure Arc provides you with a managed identity that looks and feels like the built-in managed identity on Azure, but it's not. And because Azure Arc now, I think at Build we announced an extension of Azure Arc where you can actually now run Kubernetes and serverless solutions on it, like Azure Web Apps. There is work being done to allow us to bring the managed identity onto the PaaS solutions as well, not just VMs. So Azure Arc will extend your network outside your own Azure data center and bring it everywhere. So we actually done a demo before where we had GitHub Actions using an Azure Arc joined device deploying to Azure without using anything other than a managed identity, which is great. So in this code over here, we have two configuration settings. One is, right, if I go into my app settings, it's very common to see things like, oh, I have some secret here that I need to put. But as you'll notice, this is actually empty. I don't have it here because it does reside in Key Vault. And you know what? I think it might be better if we actually open that Key Vault so you can see what I'm talking about. Azure.com. So here we are. Let's sign into my Azure. Let's jump straight into my Key Vault. So there is a secret zero problem. How do you trust the app? Is it a very interesting problem? The managed identity solves exactly the secret zero problem. Very good. Did you already educate ServiceNow to support cert-based auth for service principals? I don't think I've done that yet. So if I want to update all our PS1 scripts on-prem and use Azure Key Vault for secrets, do I need to use an access principal? A service principal, yes, you're right. I don't know if Azure PowerShell allows you to use a service. It allows you to use a service principal. The problem with the service principal is that you need to have either a certificate or a secret somewhere. But yeah, you can do that. So here I do have a Key Vault somewhere. Where is Key Vault? That's not my Key Vault, that's a subscription, sorry. It's not there, so let's do Key Vault. If you haven't used this search here, there you go. Do I have a, interesting, doesn't find my Key Vault, there you go, that's the one. Oh, Azure Automation now supports managed identity. This is awesome. Yeah, so there was a case where I was saying in the past, I put a script out there to allow you to delete service principals periodically because service principals are in effect usernames and passwords littering stuff around, especially if you're using the client credential authentication. So what I do is periodically delete them, which is a good practice because it will break things like scripts and what have you, and I have to recreate them. But the whole point is that you can run it on Azure Automation and I don't have to worry about how do I authenticate against Azure Active Directory. So in the secrets over here, we do have something called some config value from Key Vault, which matches my config. If we jump here, and the expectation is that as my program starts up, one of the things that ASP.NET does beautifully is to actually bootstrap my config and populate any values that are here and can be found in Key Vault with that value from there. Now, because I'm running locally, I don't have access to a managed identity unless I Azure Arc join my device. However, I do have access through my Azure CLI credentials, and you can use all sorts of credentials. You can have a new Visual Studio credential or Visual Studio Code credential. This Visual Studio credential will be coming from here. So I am authenticated already with my Microsoft account, and therefore it will try to find it and do it. Now, if you want to be a little bit more abstract, you could go and say, you know what, I don't really care where that credential comes from. I will use the default Azure credential. This is fine in most cases. The reason why I don't like doing that is because I find that it's too black box, right? Because it might find my Visual Studio Code credential or it might find something else. And that credential may not have access to the resources I want. So the way I solve that problem is by being super explicit and saying, this is the order of things that I want to happen. Because you can have a PowerShell credential, you can have interactive credential if you want to actually prompt the user to sign in. But in this instance, I'm using my Azure CLI credential. And then once this runs, it will add the configuration into ASP.NET. Now, ASP.NET is slightly different than other frameworks like Node and everything else, because we've done a little bit of work to make it more easy to configure and make your lives easier as developers, because that's an extension onto the default configuration builder. So this is the one thing we're doing here. And once this happens, that credential is automatically available to you, those secrets are available to you to call. So later on in one of my pages, I'm actually calling it. And then there is another page. I have my Key Vault secrets. And this is where I'm actually pulling the secret from config, the first one. But let's say that I wanted to access something in real time, right? Runtime. I want to be able to only pull that secret from Key Vault when the application is running. For this one, I'm instantiating a Key Vault client, and then I'm pulling my other secret from Key Vault, and there you have it. So this is all running. We could run it on my local machine. I think my Azure CLI is not signed in with the right account. So if I do AZ account show, I think it is, it's using my Outlook, so I don't want to use that one. So we can do AZ login. Remember, I'm using my Azure CLI credential. Someone is asking, you will always need to use a service principal if you're running outside of the Azure platform. And that's not right. If you are running outside of Azure, you can use Azure Arc to join your devices. So Azure Arc gives you a mass identity. You don't always need that. What about the workload identity federation feature in preview? Could establish trust between Azure Active Directory and outside federation. You're absolutely right. We announced that AKS, last week there was an announcement that AKS can now use a federated identity to authenticate against Azure and Key Vault to pull secrets out using federated workload accounts. So that's another way to approach this now, which is great. And I have a demo later on with GitHub Actions that shows you exactly how this works, because that's probably the first use case where we moved away from having to use a service principal account inside our GitHub Actions and now using OAuth to authenticate, which is great. So now I'm signed in. I'm going to run the demo. It's been a while since I ran this one, so let's see what happens. So .NET run. If it doesn't run, then we'll know that the issue there is that my account is not provisioned to access Key Vault. And the easiest way to find that is through the access policies. And no, this is not the one. Oh, interesting. Oh, they changed it. They changed the UI. Look at that. Beautiful. So this is my account here. I should have access to everything. So the code is running. In fact, if the code was not running, it would throw a massive exception here because it would say, I cannot access your Key Vault. So let's, because remember, it tries to load everything. Now the config in secret is I am a config secret. And then if we jump to my secrets here, festive tech calendar, that's from a previous one. So what we could do and be funky about it is we can go into our secrets and change this one. And since I've done quite a few demos, we have lots of values there. So we'll say community call. And we can save this one or create a new version. And now if I go back to my page and then refresh, holding my breath, there you go. So the beauty about that is that your admins can change all the secrets and you as a developer will be totally oblivious to the fact that this has happened, and it should work out of the box. So if you follow a best practice and you roll your secrets at the frequent cadence, then developers should not worry about it. But I've shown you the code running locally. What about running in production? Yeah, it doesn't help with AWS specifics, though. I get it. But at the same time, is there a lab on any of these? There is, I don't know if there's a lab on Key Vault. Yesterday, I was working with one of our demos, a .NET demo on how to do this. In fact, let me see if I can find it. I have all the code here on the 45 show, but I did send a pull request yesterday, which should have been approved. And there's a .NET sample, funnily enough, which we updated yesterday because there were some inconsistencies there. And then that sample was samples under Azure There's an identity storage that uses managed identity. So let me put the link over there. You can find that sample to help you out. There's actually a doc somewhere, but for now you can use this one. It uses managed identity to access and the service principal to access resources. So this is one of these examples there. Plenty of things, and then we did videos as well on this and how to use it on the 45 show on our YouTube channel. Now let's go back into Azure and see how this is actually running in production. So I do have a website somewhere. There you go. Ignore the name. I've done it for .NET Conf as well. So this is a carryover demo that I update all the time. I just haven't changed the name of the web app because you know how painful that is and having to deploy that. But let's actually browse the website. So the website is exactly the same as the code I was running locally. Now, in this instance, we are using a managed identity. So if we go here under the identity component, we have a system assigned identity, which means that our managed identity is attached to this resource. And this specific identity has access to our Key Vault. So if I come out of here and then go back to my Key Vault, and then we go into our access configuration. No, that's not the one. We want access policy, sorry. Then you will notice that we do have a managed identity called cm.netconf demo that only has 2 permissions. Unlike my local account, which is always a problem. Now I am the owner of that subscription, so therefore usually I have full permissions on all resources, and that's a very dangerous proposition. We have a get and a list permission for secrets, only secrets, nothing else, inside our for this specific managed identity. When I usually do this demo, I also set up a service principal inside my Azure CLI to use explicitly for this. And you'll notice that this is from GitHub Action. So I don't have one set up right now because I deleted everything. Can you do it under the context of the app itself and not a user? So in this case, the app itself is accessing the secrets for us, so not the user. If I go back to my web app, this managed identity belongs to that resource. So it doesn't do it on the behalf of the user, it does it as the application itself. You could be a little bit more clever as well and also assign a user assigned identity, which means that now I have full control about how this managed identity lives, because a system assigned one will be attached to the resource, whereas a user assigned one will be assigned to or will be created by me. It's a separate resource that lives separately. Why this is important, and I'm not going to talk anymore about code and we'll jump into some DevOps scenarios. Why user assigned managed identities are important is because I could have multiple here. Remember, I have a managed identity that can access my Key Vault, and I could have a separate managed identity that can access my SQL, and then I can also have a separate managed identity that can access my my storage account. And that means that I segregate my security, so if one of them gets compromised for whatever reason, then we can split it out. And when you work with code, you can be explicit about which managed identity you want to use. So if I come here, I could also say, I can also pass a specific ID. Don't know if, yeah, so you can pass a client ID. And that means that if I pass the specific ID, the managed identity will use the specific managed identity that I have allocated, the user assigned one, to allow me to only use that for all my interactions with that specific service. That credential will only be using that specific information. I think I have an extra thing there. This will be okay. Right. Right. So we've seen how managed identity solves the secrets from your code, and that's part of the DevOps. We don't want secrets in the code because they can become an attack vector. A lot of the attacks that have happened recently is because people put keys in Key Vault or secrets or what have you, and you know, they leak into a public GitHub repo. That has happened to me before. Funny story, I have my blog that has access to SendGrid, to send emails to new subscribers to my website, and I published it to GitHub in a public repo instead of a private one. And that meant that within an hour, somebody used my SendGrid account to send spam email, and I had an upper limit of 30,000 emails. So I got an email from SendGrid saying, you've sent out 30,000 emails. Congratulations. And I thought I went viral, but that was not the case. It was because I put that secret in Key Vault. So we want to definitely avoid doing that. Now, how do we deal with deployments? So we talked about code and how we avoid that, but how about deployments to, say, production? Now, we'll start with ARM. So many of you have probably worked with ARM or Bicep, and you know that in ARM, we have to define some settings. So if I go into my code, into my files, we have an ARM template deployment. We have the standard Azure deploy file, which deploys a SQL server and a SQL service. And in here, you need to pass a SQL administrator login and a SQL administrator password. This was the case up until very recently. Now we added support for Azure Active Directory authentication in SQL, and you can use Azure Identity out of the box, which is great. And therefore, you don't have to do this. But this is just an example to show you that if there is a dependency on secrets, how would you deal with that? So in ARM, you can do it in two different ways. One is the silly way that I've seen people do. Please don't do this, because again, infrastructure as code. Yeah, Bicep supports it, and I will show you how to do it with Bicep in a second. Christian, just give me a second. So this is not the right way. The right way is to go back one level. Wait, how do I go back? There, okay. And then use Key Vault. So instead of actually passing hard-coded credentials, you can say, I want to reference a Key Vault, and then I want to pull the information for that specific secret name. At runtime, our deployment is going to use an account. So this is also very important. When we come here in the service connections, you need to say how we're going to access our resources. So we need to authenticate against it. And in here, I created a deployment connection with a specific service principal. And this service principal also has access to Key Vault. That Key Vault is here, and that account is this one. I think it's the deployment access policies. I think it's the first one, the CM Key Vault reader, which is this is how it maps. I have a scenario where the user comes in via an application, but parts of the application call into other application services, which are gated by Okta. Okay, very reasonable. Is it possible to add Okta attributes to the user presence in Azure AD that can be automatically sent to the target applications which require Okta creds? You can extend the Azure AD object with custom properties or B2C with custom properties. I'm not sure if you want to bring secrets into that token, but it is possible. Is there an API call to generate a random secret? Yes, there is an API call for Key Vault to generate random secrets if you want to, before deploying the template. I haven't done it with ARM. Not sure if you can do that. One way that you could do that is you can do it with PowerShell, and then PowerShell will be used to deploy the template for you. Or you can create a custom task that you can use inside your deployment script to do so, because you can extend your deployment scripts or your actions with what you need. Okay, so we talked about that, and therefore when we run this deployment from here, this pipeline will use the, did we deploy something? No, that's an old one. Recently run pipelines. So in here, let me actually, yeah, so it doesn't really do anything magic. Let me see, edit. If we come in here, it just calls the ARM deployment template, and it also uses an identity, and it knows which connection to use. There you go. So it needs to use that connection. So with ARM, you can do it this way. If you're running locally using PowerShell, then you can use a service principal account that has the same permissions, and therefore you can run the ARM templates deployments yourself without having to rely on Azure DevOps or Azure or GitHub Actions. So we have that one. Let me stop this one and go back into the code, because now I want to show you how you can do it with other tools, right? So we've seen how you can do it with ARM templates. Let's see how you can do it with Terraform. So Terraform also supports the use of secrets. So there is a Key Vault extension for Terraform that allows you to set up your Key Vault access, and then later you can call that to pull secrets out of the Key Vault and assign them to a property, which then you can use that property to pass the information into your deployment. And this is great because it allows you now to do a lot of things without having to worry about how do you store your secrets inside your Terraform. And as you can see here, there's nothing in my Terraform to make me worry about that. So that, let's see the app, and then there should be a list. There should be something with bicep in here. There's a bicep test. There you go. So let's the bicep test, and let's open this in code as well. Thanks for joining us, Giovanni. That will also be available for you later on in YouTube, I think. So there you go. Can DevOps service connection use a managed identity for doing ARM deployments, or is this planned? I don't know if Azure DevOps supports managed identity. I don't think it does. You still have to pass a service principal account because it runs, I guess, on, unless you're using a custom agent. So one of the demos I've used in the past was to run the jobs in the custom agent and therefore be able to do that. So Mayo, Ernesto says that it does. I didn't know that it does that if you use hosted agents. So there you go. Let's see how it works with Bicep. So Bicep added support now for Key Vault. And what I do have here is a resource called Key Vault, right? And then I can use this one to get a secret. This is a recent addition, I think maybe less than a month ago. And the idea here is that I first instantiate my Key Vault. I use a specific service principal to do that again because I'm running it locally. And then what happens is we pass that information to our file here as parameters. So this is a new design. And the whole point is that Bicep will allow you to do the same thing. Therefore, you can pull any secrets for any resources that you need to deploy using this approach. So we've done that. We've done Terraform, and all these are available to they're all available in my GitHub repo. So you can, in our GitHub repo, the 45 so GitHub repo, so you can go and have a look. We also put blog posts out there. If you want to look at our blog, it's aka.ms 45 so then blog. And that allows you to go and see, rather than just looking at the code, why and how we put everything together. There is a Pulumi code as well. So cd that, and then cd Pulumi. And I've done Pulumi with AAD, so let's open this in code. Exactly the same principle here, because again, we want to make sure that your Pulumi code doesn't screw things up. And for this Pulumi, I'm using, I think, what did I use? I'm using .NET. Nice. Oh, that's just a random file. I was like, I remember I used TypeScript. So this Pulumi is using TypeScript. We do have the Azure extension here. As you can see, the pattern is very similar. The first thing that we do is we instantiate Key Vault, and then we use that information to get the secret, which we then pass as a parameter into our files. It doesn't have to be SQL. It can be anything. But the whole point there is that you should not be storing secrets. And as long as your accounts are run these deployment scripts, have the right permissions, you should be able to run them from anywhere. Now, let's switch gears and let's go into GitHub, because GitHub announced quite a few things recently. And we're also working on extending GitHub Actions to allow you to do some pretty cool stuff. So let me find my GitHub somewhere around here. There you go. In fact, I was fixing things this morning for my demos. So this is the same code that we saw running, and we have some deployments in there. If we go to the code under GitHub workflows, we have 3 different solutions. One is the standard. I put a service principal account into my solution, into my GitHub Secrets, and then I authenticate with that. You see, we're using Azure login, the standard Azure login, and then I'm passing my Azure credentials, which are stored. This is the service principal account, and it runs. So it authenticates without service principal. Remember, though, service principals are usernames and passwords stored somewhere. Therefore, they could be dangerous because whoever generated this account may have access to the secrets, and they may be able to hijack that account to do certain things like deleting. And because this service principal also has contributor rights, it can do a lot of damage, not just accessing secrets. So what we thought about doing was, why not just remove that and do something more funky, like using a remote agent, a custom agent. And instead of just doing standard stuff, we also wrote an extension that allows you to log in using a managed identity. So if you deploy an Azure VM that already has a managed identity switched on, then using this extension, which we have raised a pull request, and we expect this pull request to be approved at some point in the future to allow you to work with managed identities, then with this extension, it means that you don't have to store anything inside GitHub. There are no service principals whatsoever, and managed identities, keys and stuff are rolled automatically for you. So again, you don't have to worry about that. And this custom extension for now allows you to use a managed identity and be more efficient. Yeah, this is probably not the right one because I created a separate branch for it to use the latest code. So this is probably slightly out of date. I'm not going to run this one now because the authentication flow changed. I will put JP. I know, who's that JP, right? JP has abandoned us. I'm just kidding. Now, the even more exciting bit on all this is that we now have the ability to use federated workload identities to authenticate on GitHub. And that is extremely exciting because as of maybe 2 months ago, we added the ability to authenticate from GitHub Actions into Azure and get a token without having to either use a service principal or a managed identity. Therefore, this solution runs out of the box today. You can test it today. It's fully supported, and it doesn't use, it has secrets here, but technically it's a client ID and a tenant ID, which are not secret values, and we'd have the subscription ID, so it knows where to go to authenticate. And it again gets an access token to allow us to do the deployment. This is even more exciting because unlike managed identities or service principals, it eliminates the need to add yet something else that we have to manage. And now your IT admin team can manage these accounts, these federated accounts, directly out of the box. So if I were to run this one, obviously we need to do a little bit of a change here. And let's go and edit the startup file. And we'll say community call demo. And we'll save that. And commit. So this is all happening now. So if we go back into our actions, you should kick off the process. And in the build, I'm just going to stop it right after it does the authentication. But this is more or less how we eliminate the need to have secrets in our infrastructure as code as well. I have some issues with user provisioning services based on MS Azure. Is it the... Can I reach? Oh, who can you reach out for help? You can reach our support team. So aka.ms45show and then help. That's our official Q&A environment where more than 50 people in our support team can look into your query and help you out. But thanks for reaching out, Mikhail. Let me see if there's any other questions. Yeah, Cognito can help you with AWS, but it's slightly different to what we're doing. So there you go. It's logged into Azure Public Service. Is there going to be any multi-tenant support for Azure Arc agents in the future? I don't know that, Arian. I could find out. I know that we are working to bring something like multi-tenancy support for managed identities. And I guess that once that becomes available, then maybe Azure Arc can benefit from managed identities, because that's the dependency, right? If you want to use Azure Arc and managed identities, then managed identity needs to be supported across multi-tenant environments. If you do have a specific use case, please send me an email, 425show Microsoft.com, because our engineering team is collecting feedback on how they should be prioritizing this and what are the use cases that they need to cover. So this is a great topic or great use case that I can pass on to them. I think we just deployed everything. And this is exactly the code that runs right here. If I go back to my Azure, it actually deployed the website, which means that if I come to the website, it might take a little bit of time to start up because we just deployed. It's thinking about it now. Let's see, did we catch it? Yeah, you can see it's starting up now because we just deployed. Ha, and it works. Like you always hold your breath like this and then fingers crossed and toes crossed that things are going to work. If you remember back in the old deployment days with IIS, you would not want to see that yellow page of death for your ASP applications because it was always horrendous. Right, I think that's me with about 12 minutes to spare. Let me remind you again that we do have an awesome hackathon happening next week, and I would love to see you all there. Let me just, you know what, rather than do this, I'm going to do that so you can actually scan the QR code. So that's a hackathon. We're adding more prizes as we speak. And if you like what you saw, we do have the 45 show that you can join us Tuesdays and Thursdays to cover scenarios and what have you. Also our YouTube channel and what else? And our GitHub repo. So everything that you saw, it's available on the GitHub repo and the blog post that cover the end-to-end setup and process and permissions. Are there any other questions or anything that you haven't seen that you would like to see as part of the Secure DevOps with Managed Identity? We always try to evolve the sessions and the talks to make it more relatable to you guys. But I appreciate everyone for joining us today. This was definitely a lot of fun. What many people don't know is that if you're accessing an Azure resource from another Azure resource, often you don't need a key vault at all. You could add permissions that allow you to the Managed Identity to do so. That's absolutely right. Key vault is only for, like, it's needed for certain things like storing secrets, but Managed Identity does allow you to access resources on Azure. That's the whole point. And again, the code does exactly that. It accesses resources before it accesses other resources. But your code could access SQL Server directly from your web app without needing to go through Key Vault first. The recording will be available, says Stephen, which is great. The Power Platform, how can this benefit from Managed Identity? Well, the Power Platform, there are two ways to do that. I've done it with Power Apps before, where we authenticated against Azure Active Directory using a Service Principal account. So the Power Apps has an Azure Active Directory connector or an OAuth 2 connector that you can use to authenticate and then pull information from other services or an API. But I don't know if things like Power BI, for example, can use that. The QR code, yeah, I'll add the QR code. You're absolutely right. And I will add the link here to the, sorry, that hasn't changed. There you go. Yeah, so that's the hackathon URL. And we do have, like, if you attended the session today, then there is an awesome link that you can use to actually get your first verifiable credential, which is always fun, right? Let me add the link there. And you can see how the verifiable credential works in action and how we did it. Also, you can check out the code behind it, because verifiable credentials, I think, are the future of identity. It's actually quite mesmerizing to see how well it works and how you can eliminate the need of managing credentials, because now as an enterprise, you can use verifiable credentials to authenticate people without you having to manage them, which is great. So this, if I add it to the link, if I add the link here, do keep in mind that you don't need provide excessive permissions to apps. Yeah, that's something that we didn't cover. I think I touched upon it very, very shortly. It is very important to always provision for the right things. So if you do need to access data inside your storage account and you're not editing anything, you should be a reader, not a contributor to that storage account, whichever account you use. So here in my Key Vault, let's jump in there very quickly, just show you stuff. In the access policies, the accounts that I use for accessing the secrets from the different agents and tasks only have a get and a list permission in our Key Vault. And if you switch to Azure Active Directory authentication, because right now we're using access policies instead of RBAC, with RBAC now you can provide a fine-tuned access permission at the secret level. So you might want to say, I only want this account to access specific secrets and read them, rather than giving them access to the whole Key Vault. Because if I do an enumeration of all the secrets, then that also presents a challenge, because I may have secrets for other applications. I may have connection strings to other databases that my application doesn't need to use. So you could have an enumeration attack because somebody has found a way to hijack the code and dump them somewhere else. Didn't see an answer to this. Does mass identity work in Power Automate flows? I haven't tested that, so that's a question that we can take back and ask. The recommendation is to use Azure RBAC for Key Vault. That's absolutely right. I would say yes. Now that we support them and we have a more fine-tuned access to secrets, yes, use RBAC over access policies. This is a slightly older demo, which I need to update at some point as well. But it just shows that you can do both. And it is very important to know that once you switch your Key Vault to use RBAC, then it uses just RBAC. You can use a mix of both access policies and RBAC for configuration. So you can see here, they used to combine access policies and access configuration in one, and now you can see that they've changed that. So this is the Vault access policy, you can change to RBAC, and you also notice that because I wanted to use Key Vault for provisioning resources, I had to check this box, otherwise it will not work. You can use Key Vault with service principals or mass identities to deploy stuff. Yeah, there you have it. I'll share the slide deck as well later on, but make sure to get your badge, get your verifiable credential today, sign up for a hackathon, and then make sure to follow us on YouTube or Twitch if you want to stay up to date with things like that. How do you do end-to-end security things with mass identity? Any language, any platform. So today I did show you how to do it with .NET, but I also have a very similar demo with Node, if I remember correctly. So CD. So I remember I have the Node stuff. So CD Node, Node API, secure Node maybe. Secure Node, there you go. And then I will open this very briefly. Again, this is also available on our repos. So in here, what we do is and the code is very similar as well. So Node is awesome because Azure Identity has done that very, very well. Consistent way to create credentials and then pass them to services. So here I'm working with Cosmos and I have a credential which I then use to authenticate. And we also get a secret from Key Vault as one of the tasks there. That code is ready to download and run. Can you explain a bit about what goes on in the hackathon? I can explain that, absolutely. So for the hackathon, we expect people to build a solution that can issue and verify credential, or just verify credentials. We have the samples. Everything is free, so you can get a free Azure subscription. You can get a free Azure AD tenant through the Microsoft 365 developer program. So you don't need to, bring resources. You can get brand new ones for the hackathon itself. And then we have samples in multiple languages like .NET, Java, JavaScript, and Python that you can use as the basis for you to build something. And to qualify, all you have to do is just do a very quick 2-minute video presentation that says, this is how I build it, this is why I build it, these are the scenarios I think that they work for this. Like, we want to enroll every student in the university and get them a verifiable credential that they can present at the cafeteria to get access to their funds and pay for food. Whatever scenario you want to think, right? But we're giving you most of the things that you need to participate in the hackathon for free. You just need to customize it and build it for yourself. And off you go. Also, we do have a fantastic blog that summarizes all the activities that we're doing this month. So let me put that URL here. It's 425.show and then DID blog. And there, again, we have all the information about all the videos that we did, all the documentation. There's white papers, there's documentation, there's API information for developers, and then information on how to participate in the hackathon. If you haven't seen the QR codes and the links that I pasted over here, if you're watching it at a different time. And the idea is that we want to help you get the next level of identities, especially with Web3 and blockchain and decentralization happening as we speak. So hopefully that was helpful. Let me know in the comments. Hit me on Twitter if you have any questions about Identity, and make sure to join our Discord community, because this is where all the goodness is happening. Thank you very much for the kind comments, everyone. I hope you all have a great day and join the next community call on the 17th.
Thank you, Christos. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you, everyone, also for joining us and your comments, your feedback. It's great having you here.